Do something intelligent!
Hi, I'm Fless. This is the follow-up to my solo crossing of the Simpson Desert video. If you want to give a solo crossing a go, hopefully this video will explain vehicle preparation, what to take and what to expect. Crossing the Simpson Desert is not for the faint-hearted or risk-averse. Provided you don't try to travel during the summer close season, if you break down you're not going to die. It's unlikely you'd have to wait for more than a day for someone else to come along. However, if you have a mechanical failure, the cost for a vehicle recovery would be a near-death experience. I travelled from west to east. Because of the prevailing winds, the sand dunes tend to be marginally steeper if you start from Birdsville. However, Big Red and a few of the other dunes at the eastern end are an exception. On my third day, when I reached the salt pans and clay sections, it was only necessary to engage four-wheel drive for the sand dunes. Keep in mind that the salt pans were completely dry when I crossed. They become very slippery and even impassable after rain. You need a capable four-wheel drive vehicle with good ground clearance and a gearbox with low range. My vehicle is a manual, but when crossing the soft sand dunes, it's clear that automatics are much more suitable, as you can keep up momentum without clunky gear changes. Raised suspension isn't necessary for this trip, but you definitely can't do this in a soft all-wheel drive SUV. I like my D-Max, but all the well-respected four-wheel drive vehicle makes available in Australia are pretty good. Just keep in mind that if you're stuck in Oodnadatta with a broken windscreen or a faulty alternator, you might be waiting for a very long time for parts to arrive for a less common vehicle make. It's important to travel light without compromising safety. It's much more difficult to get an overloaded vehicle over the sand ridges, and you'll use a lot more fuel. The novelty of setting up and packing up elaborate campsites will wear pretty thin after a few days. Rain is very rare, so a simple swag or dome tent is all you need. I'm lucky because my bed is set up permanently in my canopy. Vehicle preparation, of course, includes making sure maintenance is up to scratch. The only additions under my bonnet are an oil catch can, and I use an oil-soaked chucks on the underside of my air filter. After a few days of dusty tracks, the chucks can be washed out with petrol or just thrown away and a new one installed. It's amazing how much dust it will catch. The recovery equipment I took was a long-handled shovel, a snatch strap, an extension strap, an equaliser strap to connect to the vehicle, a few D-shackles and an EPIRB. The EPIRB was from my boat. You can register the use of an EPIRB for a desert crossing by logging on to the Australian EPIRB registration site and just describe when and where you're going to the desert. I didn't take a sat phone. You can hire them at Birdsville and Mount Dare. If you're going in a group, it might be worthwhile to share the expense. I also had a couple of Max Tracks takeoffs in the ute. They are perfect for if you get stuck on the beach, but I doubt their effectiveness if you become bogged 3/4 of the way up a sand dune. But none of my recovery equipment was used. Your best option is to just take a bigger run up or let a little more air out of your tyres. Unless you have a substantial sand anchor, I really can't see much use for a winch either. You should run around 15 pounds per square inch in your tyres in the desert. Make sure you carry a pump for when you hit the bitumen at the end of the crossing. I ran 265, 70 profile, 17-inch all-terrain tyres with 121 load rating. That's 32-inch diameter tyres in the old money. I took an additional spare wheel strapped in place at the rear bench seat. A locking front or rear diff might help a little on the higher sand dunes. I became stuck about 5 times, but 2 of those were because I had forgotten to turn off traction control after a food stop. The traction control on my D-Max is fantastic on bitumen, especially if it's wet and when driving slowly over rocky outcrops. But in soft sand and slippery mud, it's definitely better to turn it off. Spinning wheels actually help with momentum when bouncing between holes on rough tracks going up sand dunes. You'll need a South Australian Government's Desert Parks Pass to drive across the desert. Make sure you apply for it a few weeks before your planned trip to make sure the paperwork arrives at your home. At $170 it's a real rip-off, but the booklet and map that comes with it is quite useful. The Desert Parks map is all you need for navigation. You won't get lost, especially if you take the French line, which is quite straightforward. As far as mapping apps are concerned for your phone or tablet, I only use Google Maps, which work fine. Make sure you download offline maps to cover all of your trip before you leave home. There's no phone or data reception anywhere out there. If you're a keen four-wheel driver, you might want to buy the HEMA mapping app or a similar app. Wikicamps is also a very useful app for travelling and remote camping. It costs only a few dollars, but it's well worth it. Again, make sure you do an offline download of all the states you'll be travelling through before you leave home. Channel 10 is the recommended UHF radio channel for crossing the desert. It comes in very handy when another vehicle comes the other way and you need to work out how to pass. Some people make periodic calls advising anyone in range which direction they are travelling in to avoid bull bar clashes at the tops of sand dunes. The problem with this is that it can be a bit confusing, as it's impossible to pinpoint exactly where you are in relation to other vehicles. Visual lines of sight are quite small between the sand dunes, especially at the western side of the crossing. The dunes become further apart as you travel east. They also become much higher. A sand flag attached to the bull bar or top of your vehicle is mandatory. The regulations are detailed in the Desert Parks Handbook. I want to talk about the biggest mistake I made. Foolishly, I thought I had my equipment in the back of the ute appropriately secured. Wrong. I drive pretty slowly and carefully so as not to damage my vehicle, but to get up many of the sand dunes you simply must get a decent run up, and the run up is always over the roughest and bumpiest sections of the track. Everything that wasn't properly secured in the back was broken, and everything that was properly secured was broken by something that wasn't properly secured. At one stop, I looked in the back and saw I had a mixture of coffee, flour, rice, water, honey and broken glass everywhere. I managed to use only 72 litres of diesel, driving for 600 kilometres from the fuel stop at Oodnadatta to Birdsville. That included about 400 kilometres of desert driving. In total, I carried 130 litres of fuel. While Air Creek was still flooded from the northern summer rains, the detour around the crossing was only about 10 kilometres. Earlier in the season, the detour was an extra 70 kilometres. Remember that I travel very light and drive conservatively, but hopefully this might give you an idea of how much fuel you might need. I only used about 12 litres of water in the 3 days across the desert, which included 4 or 5 litres I lost when I didn't close the lid properly on one of my water containers. But if you like to keep things clean more than me, that would include just about everybody, you'll need more than that. I hope this information helps you if you want to do a solo crossing of the Simpson Desert. Challenges like this are becoming more and more harder to find, so take my advice and give it a go. It'll be something to brag about when you get home. If you want to know any more, just post a comment below and I'll try to answer it. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel.